Hi, I'm Seamless, and this is part 2 of today's How to Bass, where I will show you how to make this bass. This is part 2, where we'll go very much in depth about every step and why and how, and the theory behind everything that I did to make this bass, so that you may better understand for yourself and learn things. Before I get going, much in the first part, I want to let you know that this weekend I'll be having 2 guest live streams. The first one will be on Saturday. It'll be Coven, Frequent, and Sean Law. And then Sunday will be Savant. They're both at the same time, 6 p.m. EST, which is -5 GMT. Just that Coven, Frequent, Savant's on Saturday, tomorrow. And Sunday we'll have Savant. Just so that you know. If you go and like my Facebook page, you'll be brought up to date on information such as this, because this is where I announce these things. Except for when I remember to put a video preview and stuff like that up on YouTube. But Facebook is easier. Right. Yes. Good. Like I said in the first part, the way that this works is that there is an original sound. Can't hear because I muted it. Which is resampled to be this sound. Which was vocoded against this sound. Which eventually became this sound. And such. Yeah, so this is actually a track whip, which is why it does the drums and stuff, but that's why the bass is effectively all these guys up here. So, first things first, this guy. The Simple Reese. So, this is a pseudo FM patch. Like, it involves FM, but it's mainly just a Reese. It has a saw wave, which is going out, and a sine wave, which is reinforcing it, going into a filter, which has some distortion enabled in the wave shaper, and also LP3 enabled, which has its own distortion going on. It's called Simple Reese because this used to be a preset that I made, but I have altered it to fit my purposes this time. I did the oscillator sync fake trick where you FM a saw by another saw. That's what I did here. But I FM'd it positive, which because it actually had a bit of a difference in the low value areas if it was a positive polarity versus negative polarity FM. So I decided that the positive polarity FM was what I wanted. The main output saw is also being modulated by another operator, a sine wave, just to move the pitch around slowly. As you can see, it's set very, very low at the pitch ratio. This creates the Reese movement against the sine wave, which is not moving, so that's why that works. And also, it's moving it again because the oscillating, the FM oscillator is not moving in pitch, which means that playing against one that is moving in pitch creates more movement. So we're creating movement. That's the point here. Once we made this sound, I'm going to patcher. Now, my initial plan here was to make a bandpass bass, which means I would make an EQ that has a bandpass shape, but I'd also make an EQ that has the lows and the highs somewhat preserved, so that whatever that we're doing with the bandpass, there's still sub, and there's still texture. However, what I would normally do is I would process the passed band here, and then I would let this go out to the master to be processed by itself, so that's where the bite comes from. However, I did the opposite. I processed the low and the high through a whole bunch of choruses to create a pitch warble effect, and then I distorted it all together with the bypassed low and high to get so that basically this is the thing that creates the bite. We can't hear because the low pass filter here is engaged. I'm a bit confused right now as to why more high frequency things happen when I went down to lower, and it's because of the nature of the distortion that I decided to use. So this wave shaper, as you can see, it's got this weird wave going on. If you right click this point, you can change the waveform to be a wave or a pulse. It has sort of the same effect, but the wave is what we wanted. And there's two sides to the wave. There's what I had, and there's also the sine wave version. But I wanted the triangle wave version. And a wave shaper being an in-out function, that is to say that here's this line area represents the input, and see that line was the peak. That's where it peaked. You see how it moved up and down like that. So it basically means that if it comes in and it's like over here, like minus 12 dB, it's actually going to get pushed up to this point. But then as it moves down, it's going to get pushed back down again, and then it's going to get pushed back up, it's going to get quieter. It happens really fast. It does not happen with any attack or delay like a compressor would. So this creates distortion, and this particular one creates very interesting distortion, and I kind of enjoy it. So it's nice. But as you see, I had a filter, which is this guy here. I'm just low passing the whole thing. That's all I'm doing. Now it's going into a stereo shaper. Now I use a stereo shaper to achieve a mid-side split. What is a mid-side split? A mid-side split is where you're splitting effectively the mono information from the stereo information. It's not 100% what that actually is, but effectively that's what it is. So I split it into two signals. One is just mono, and one is all stereo. Combined, you get the original signal. But I'm able to process them differently. In this case, I elected to remove all the low end via the Maximus from the stereo section, so that all the bass is dead center. This is just really an experiment. I didn't go out with any ideas of having to do this, but this is kind of what just happened. The way you achieve this is that you set the in-out difference send, which will send literally some of the sends, any of the sends. And then you set the bars to this position. I'm not totally sure why, but this is what the manual said to achieve this result. So that's what I did, because I read the manual. When you do that, in Patcher, if you go to the outputs things here, go to inputs, audio, and then you want to add one. Actually, you want to add output, so add output. And as you can see, there's only 4 possible outputs that the plugin can have, so you enabled it. And then now we have plugin picker, which does things, which I don't want. Stop doing that, please. Thank you. So now you have the stereo shaper with the main output, and then you have the other output, which is being split up to be mid and side, which I'm combining in Maximus's. I'm using the Maximus for its multi-band compressor, pretty just regularly using it on the mids, just making sure all aspects of it are being fairly represented and compressed as I see fit. Not a lot going on here. I have soft saturation engaged on the top just to put it together. And like I said, I basically turned the pre-gain all the way off on the lows for the sides, and then I didn't compress the mid at all, and I made the high kind of bring up more as it goes lower. That's what this configuration does here. When you engage double curve, you're able to do this sort of thing. And like I said about the compressor, or the wave shaper, the Maximus works with an in-out graph behavior. So that means that as it gets louder, it'll kind of stay that way, and then if it's not as loud, it'll actually get pushed down a bit, and then as it gets quieter, it gets pulled up a bit to kind of keep the levels around this area, and it creates a sort of even spread sound for whatever you're doing it to. In this case, I'm doing it to the highs, so that the highs are present more. That's what I wanted in the stereo. So there's lots of high frequency stereo presence happening. And I EQ'd together for coloration. What I mean by that is that this is where I shaped what was at the time the final sound just to be what I wanted it to be. And I compressed it one more time to be together the most. And I did more or less the same configuration to get the same result. And then I put self saturation on the master. And I actually didn't really use actual compression. So, and it's going out. And that's recorded. And then it's dropped into a harmor. It is resynthesized. So the first thing I did was I dropped it into both A and B. When I went into B in the advanced tab, I turned on side. This, like the stereo shaper split, creates a mid-side relationship inside harmor. So A is the mid and B is the side. This is how you do stereo resampling in harmor, because just putting it in one will give you a mono result. I turned on high precision, turned off denoise, put it on perfect. This part isn't necessarily necessary. If you're getting too much problems playing it, you can go to average, and your CPU usage will go down, and the sound will be the same. And as well, when you render it, it'll render it in perfect. So you're good. Now, I actually did different settings on the A and the B, which is a new thing that I did today, was that I experimented doing different processing on mid and side. So A, I used 9 voices on the unison, mess with the unison pitch to get this shape. This is so that, because the low frequencies were getting muddy as hell when I had it on that much, so I basically turned the lowest off and kept it regular for everything else. Phase was set down a little bit. That's on uniform just because I have a little bit of prism engaged. And on B, I have a little bit more prism engaged. Did I do anything on the prism shape? Is a question. I did not. So it's the default prism configuration. This guy here. Harmonic protection is engaged on A, but not on B because there really isn't any on B. There's no real low end in B to protect, so that's why I did that. I also have different sharpness settings on A and B. Higher sharpness settings will get you that kind of watery-ish effect sometimes. Because I'm using A and B, combining the two was a good way to attenuate that, but also I didn't really do the things that create the sound anyway. But a higher sharpness setting will make it sound more like the original recording. A lower sharpness setting will make it sound more like a synthy sort of kind of deal. So that's why I had it on all the way. And then it's distorted and compressed, and then recorded, and then dropped into another harmonic. Again, when the same mid-side split, but this time I did absolutely nothing to the side. The side stayed the exact default the way it was before, except that I put on high precision and noise. You have to do that for each side because the event settings are individual for each part. And then on A, I turned down the sharpness a little bit, did more regular style, low amount of two voice unison on resample, and then I engaged the harmonic image format mutation over here with a little bit of mix off so that the original was kind of still there. And then I did this to kind of like bring down the formancy, what formats there weren't that many, to make it sound more like gnarly. Less sharpness. Yeah. And then I distorted it and compressed it. That created the sound. Then I rendered it out and I got a sound. Now, that was originally the thing that I wanted. That was like I was trying to make a sound, and that was going to be like what I wanted to do. And I liked what I got, except that I didn't like its texture. Like the actual character of the sound, I didn't really dig. But I liked I liked the kind of like modulation it had, not just the filter movement, but like the gnarly sort of evil vocal qualities that it has, just very slightly. I just hated the character. This is the way that the sound itself sounded. So I got in my head that I wanted to vocode it. Not necessarily vocode it, but vocode something else by it, so that this thing would be the modulator. So its character, its qualities that I enjoyed will be imprinted on something that had a better character. So I went to go find something. Now, I was going to make a sound that was actually more sharp, just like clearer, sort of empty saw-based sound. But then I hit a preset by accident. I got this. This is one of my phase verbs, phase verb 19. And what this basically is that it's the modulation is being accomplished by the phaser. The phaser movement it's doing this. This blurriness you're seeing is the result of the phaser mask, which is saving some of the frequencies, the high frequencies and the particular mids. But not the lows. You see, I have some harmonic protection on, but not a lot, which means that some of it's being attenuated. And against distortion, this means that when that happens, the higher frequencies that are still there are going to be louder, which is why we're getting that like sort of high-end fuzz happening while the modulation is occurring. That like bit is what is when the low end is being brought out by the phaser, but the high end is still here. Because you see vertically, which is where it's being read, it's not there, or it is still there. The high frequencies. I have it on detune 2, which is causing the squarish sort of sound. I have the timbre set to almost total saw. The weird chamber thing is a result of this local EQ setting that I did, where I turned off a bit of the mids and some of the high mids and made the highs a little bit higher, the lows a bit lower or higher, and then this one peak here, which you can kind of see happening. This is where I liked it, so that's where I put it. As you saw when I was moving it around, that actually has an effect on the shape of the waveform. That's what's causing that, because I did not really mess with the timbre mix. I am sneezy. Timbre mix. Didn't mess with it. It's the same. I kind of dick with it. It's done. So this is the sound that I used to be the carrier of the sound. So then I put it in a vocoder with the other thingy. Now by default, when you put something into a vocoder, the routing settings are probably not going to be right. In this example, it was set like this. It said the modulator was 1 and the carrier was 0. Now, the modulator was 1. I put it in number 14 here, and I cut off the low end a bit. I actually brought it back. Originally, it was a little bit higher than that, but I brought it back because I like the sound. And I'll explain why. That's important to note that, because the 0 number here, what this means, not being 1 or 2, the 0 number means that it's using the total input signal as that particular routing. In this case, the carrier. So that means the combination of the Harmer bass sound that I made and the resampled sound together is actually being run through as the carrier. Now, at first you're thinking, okay, that's whatever, especially because in here, the MIDI that I used to actually make the sound was almost the MIDI that I used to play the new sound, the Harmer, the preset, the phase warp. And so I meant that it would play together, so then whatever, that's cool, so it's a neat idea. And it is a neat idea, except that I didn't keep it the same. I did change the MIDI, and I cut up the modulator to be in different places. So it's actually it's not playing the same notes together, and yet it still sounds kind of okay. And the reason why that is because in the vocoder, which is over here somewhere, yeah, in the vocoder, I have the actual vocoder output cutting off at the low end, which is what I normally do, and I have the carrier all the way up, but only coming out on the low end, which is what I normally do, so that you reinforce the sub with the original sound. But that means that that makes this decision more important. The idea that I'm cutting the low end off on the modulator as well. So the modulator is still coming through as the carrier, but not the low end, which means that the actual note, the sub, will remain crystal clear because it's sticking with the actual Harmer carrier sound that I picked. So now all this modulation is stuff that's happening after the Vocoded. This Vocoded is maybe like the halfway point of making the sound. So I EQ'd it. This is actually an EQ that I made after I made everything else because I needed to boost it at this particular stage. And what this does is it's making that kind of bell sort of tone that's in the low mid area come out more into the compressor, which is this guy here. This compressor is just compressing it like normal, and the output is being soft saturated to keep it at 0 dB. But mostly because I like the distortion that soft saturation gives you. There's not really any reason for it to be at 0 dB at this point. And it's distorted a little bit. This is a bit of rounder saturation. You can tell I like more saturation. You can tell I like distortion a little bit, right? Now the low filter. So here's the fun part. As we discovered in part 1, one of the big reasons why I used the low filter was actually off. And it's this guy. So the first thing I have is just the basic default low pass filter with the cut set to mod X. That's being automated by this automation clip. This guy here, that dude. That's the automation clip that's controlling the primary cutoff modulated part of the sound of the song. I apologize for my sniffles. I hope it's not too gross. In number 2, I had a bandpass engaged, and what the window we're looking at here is the same mod X control as the low pass filter. So look what happens when I move. It's a straight line with the mod X that's passing through, not a 1-to-1 representation with the bandpass. So this means that the bandpass is doing more crazy automation as the frequency area opens up on the low pass. I just realized something. I really just failed on my main purpose here. So what I wanted to do, what I ended up not doing, like I said in the first video, I actually had this off the whole time. I didn't even notice. And I had it on when I was messing with it, but I turned it off to change something. I never turned it back on. And I worked with the sound just as without it. And it totally is fine. It's a fine sound. I might even just keep it like that, especially because I just realized that this is happening in parallel, not in series. Now, what that means is that because what I wanted to have happen, I wouldn't even have been able to do this the way that I want to do. What I wanted to have happen is that I wanted the bandpass filter to filter into the low pass filter, so that there was crazy bandpass movement going on beneath everything, but the low pass filter is controlling the ultimate top, the ceiling, the maximum amount that's being open at any one point. So that just means that crazier modulation is happening, but still under my control of the low pass. However, this is happening in parallel, which means that even when the low pass isn't doing anything at all, this bandpass is just active to do whatever it wants. It's still kind of cool sounding though. Like when I had both on in the first video, and I realized this. It's still kind of good, but it's not quite the right, like, the sound that I wanted out of this. So I may mess with that a bit later with what I want to do. But I'm going to turn that off just now because the actual sound that I previewed and that I wanted to show you guys was without it. So the LUT filter is actually not totally necessary here. Just some kind of cutoff filter is necessary for a low pass. Now, in the volume for this, though, I actually went in and I modified it so that when mod X is all the way down, the volume is all the way off, which means that when it's at 0, it's at dead silence. Which you would think it would do that with low pass, but it doesn't actually go low enough. So that's why I did that. So that when it goes to 0, like it does here, it's actually just off. And then I EQ'd again, just to really, really shallow changes to change the character of the sound. And then I had this reverb. So this reverb is being modulated as well. You see that there. Now that automation clip is this guy. This creates that kind of whooshy pre-sound that comes in. Now, the reason why this is happening is because I have a fairly long decay on the reverb, which means that when a sound happens and it stops, there's still kind of things happening. So if I automate the reverb to come on, the tail is still present. So this means that even though the sound ends here, I can have it lead into the next sound. Like right there. Same thing with like this bit here. And that adds just wonderful atmosphere to the whole of the sound, and I dig the crap out of that. So this actually, let's talk about this here. So this is actually modulating some of the carrier sounds, the real carrier, the phase verb. This guy. It's modifying the stereo pan. So because this is the primary carrier, it's the one that's cutting through the most. This is the one that has the most command of what the mononess and stereoness of the sound. So this is basically controlling the panning amount. So when it's on, there's more stereo. When it's less, it's less stereo. This is the phaser with control. Now, for the first half of this, it didn't actually occur to me to modulate it, but I liked what I got, so I left it alone. So for the second half, I decided to modulate it and see what would happen. The control that I'm changing is this guy here. As you can see, it really screws around with the phaser position. And it's a lot of fun. It won't have as much of an effect as it might otherwise because of the phaser masking, because the certain frequencies are always going to be there, but it adds enough of a change that it creates a more dynamic sound. I don't think I mentioned that in the first video, so it's going to be kind of confusing. And I apologize for that. I apologize for confusing you. Now here's the real fun. So, the reason, okay, so this was a solution to a problem, but then it ended up being a neat modulation capability. So what was happening is I opened up this compressor, and there were certain parts, like if I just turn it off completely, there were certain parts of the sound. Actually, I'll just show you the end. There are certain parts of that sound that like I wanted to be accentuated more in the frequency range, except that if I were to EQ it up, it would ruin the rest of it. They wouldn't be balanced with everything else. I could EQ modulate it, and so that it's present just for there. But I went a step further. I opened up the compressor because one solution, like this is actually kind of how de-essers work. De-essers work because you want, like when someone's talking, it's every once in a while they make a sound that occupies a certain part of the spectrum. When they're not making that sound, they're just speaking normally. You still want the frequencies that are present at the level that they are in that part, but for when they go, you want those frequencies to be low. So what you do is you take a multi-band compressor like this, and you kind of do a shape like this. You just make a shape that's just in that range of this frequency spectrum that you want to be cut, or you want to control. And you notice that when, like for example, in this kind of speech area that I'm doing now, the area of the spectrum that you want to get rid of has a very, very low activity. So what you do is you lower the threshold to just above that, and then you make it a limiter. And so then when I go and you get really loud, it's actually going to be crushed right back down so that it never gets too overpowering. But then during the rest of the speech, when you're talking regularly, it's not affecting it. It's not changing it. So that was the point. That was the idea that I would do. I would do basically the opposite of de-essing, because I was going to use expansion, the opposite of compression, to bring up the parts of the frequency spectrum that I wanted. And so what I did was I changed it. But here's the thing about that, though. It had the same problem where I wanted to bring it up for that one part, but it still sounded wrong for the rest of it. It didn't have the same kind of control that I wanted as you would with de-esser. So I thought, okay, well, if I was gonna EQ modulate, I can modulate the band position of this compressor, which I totally did. Now, the compressor shape that I use in our graph, you can see that I made it so that right up until the very end of dead silence, it's actually being brought to be rather loud. It's like -18 to -6 is a pretty big ass jump. So this is ensuring that whatever section that this is occupying, whatever frequencies are there, no matter how quiet, are going to be brought to being audible. And so then I modulate it around. It's kind of like a weird bandpass compressor modulation is kind of what's happening here. And had such a very interesting effect on the sound. Now, the way I decided to control this is that when I created an automation clip for the two things, except that the automation clip is still 0 to 100, but that's not what I wanted. So what I did was I limited, for example, the high band, the minimum amount that it could get to is 50%. In the low band, the highest it can get to is 50%. So that means that for this Maximus, the highest amount this low band can get to is right like there, and this one can only get to right there. So you don't ever like have weird like mirror effects happening. So that means that like it doesn't ever collide incorrectly, is what I did that for. However, you could just do 0 to 100 and just forget about it, because if you notice how when I did cross it, it actually still created a region. So it's not going to ever just like shut off and like be nothing. So if you didn't want like total super control over what you were doing and you just kind of leave it to fate, that's one way to do it. It's not to limit it the way that I did. And then I ran out of effect slots because I forgot to put this all in the patcher, which would have made everything better. So then I put an EQ, and it's going out to the side. But it's also going out to this extra thing, which is creating the high frequency sort of distortion that we're hearing. Now, I tie the automation of this channel to the main filter settings here. This automation clip, the low pass cutoff. And basically the point of this was that I centered it on just the bell kind of low mid sound that it creates here. I chorused it for some effect, just some stereo, whatever. And then I distorted it with this weird little shape here. Now, much like that bandpass modulation compressor that I had set up, this in-out graph means that it's going to be brought up until nearly the very end. And that's what that fuzz is. That fuzz is created when you do these kinds of things. So that's what I did, and that's what I wanted. And then I EQ'd it. Because I wanted just the high frequency sort of data. And I also kind of like what the low end sort of sound like, so I did that too. Let's see, together. So without that, this is what it sounds like. And that's pretty much it. So this is a pretty automation heavy bass, and as well, like creating it, it's interesting because I originally wanted this resampling to be like the sound that I wanted, and I liked the sort of the characteristics that came out of it, but then I didn't like other characteristics that came out of it, so I wanted more control of the characteristics, so I decided to use vocoding to achieve that. And I wanted more modulation possibilities, so I modulated the vocoding and all this stuff, and then the reverb, then the bandpass compressor, and the phaser, and stereo, and all this good stuff. This is a very highly detailed, highly controlled sound is what I've created here. Now, what's good about this though is that I don't necessarily need to make new resampling. I could use this one sample to achieve what I need to get out of this, because the primary modulation is still being taken care of by the filter that's after the vocoder. However, like the more interesting character of the sound is still the result of the resampled sample. So I would make more, to make more interesting decisions later. Yeah, but it's still very interesting that like the carrier of the sound is technically both sounds together. It's the main signal it's being routed from both signals into the main signal of the Vocodex. That's what's causing that sort of relationship. So, like I said in the first video, this project will be available to download in the description. However, it will only contain this stuff, the bass stuff. These drum business or whatever contains things that I'm not able to give you because it's not my rights to do that. So, you'll just have the bass. We'll have all the effects up here, and it'll have also this master compressor right here, which is also still coloring the sound. And such. If you have any questions about any of this, which, man, I'm sure you do, because it's kind of confusing, let me know, and I'll try to help you. I feel like I can. Don't forget that tomorrow, Saturday, I'll be having a live stream at 6 p.m. EST with Coven, Frequent, and John Law. And on Sunday, I'll have the live stream at 6 p.m. EST with Savant. It'll be a lot of fun. Also, check out Savant's future music video that just came out. It's pretty sweet. Yes. If you have questions about any of this ever, any questions at all, ask me. And as usual, have a nice day.